Here's some information that was inspired by a comment that I had on one of my videos. What happens when you get water going inside your headset or other components like your bottom bracket, your seat tube and stuff like that? Can we prevent it? Should we worry about it? What happens when there's rust on the surface? Should we clean it? Is it going to destroy everything? I'm going to show you on some tips what to do and insights. Certain areas like bolts, whether it's inside a bolt or just around the bolt, where there's a washer here, we got some surface rust right here. Not a big deal, we're not going to hurt anything. All we can do is get some steel wool, preferably some rougher. If we go 0, 0, 0, 0, 4 zeros, this will take this surface rust off. It's only a problem when the rust starts to eat the metal, and then you'll start to see pitting and little divots and kind of like craters are being developed. So that's when the metal is going to be compromised. But in this case, this will clean up pretty easily. So water naturally is going to get in certain areas. It's going to get in probably right underneath where your bolt is. It's got a little washer with the bolt. It's naturally going to leak in here. They're not meant to be completely sealed off. Otherwise we'd have maybe a rubber seal or some type of, even a little bit of grease will help deter water. But water eventually going to run down here. Here we have, this is a quill type stem. The stem goes down and then goes and recesses right inside about the head tube right about there. This is our lock nut, and this is our adjusting nut down right below it. So water is going to seep right in here, go inside here, and it's probably going to make contact with our steer tube right about here. All that's normal. The bikes are built to are designed to take in some water. That's why we use a pretty healthy amount of grease when we're doing assembly. So when we come back at a later time, the grease is there to help us still to break bolts free, also protect metal from rusting. Things like that, as well as allowing us to get good torque settings when we do tighten this bolt up, and also grease allows us to stop any potential creaks that may happen. So if parts start to come loose, dirt will get inside there, but hopefully grease will detour water and dirt for a little while, and then once that grease is gone, over time that will happen, especially if you're washing the bike or going through rain or going through creeks, things like that. Over time the grease will dissipate somewhat. It also get contaminated with dust, so that's when we need to get in there, and it varies. So how often should you go in and do maintenance, whether you need to re-grease or readjust? Or readjust, a lot of times the bike is going to talk to you. It's going to let you know that, hey, this thing sounds a little loose, we got this creaking sound, things like that. You can do quick checks. You can hold your front brake, you can rock the bike forwards and backwards. That'll let you know if your headset's loose. It's going to be a lot of clunking. Even putting the bike on the ground, lifting the bike up by the stem, lifting that front tire off the ground, and then dropping the bike just a couple inches, you're going to hear some extra noise. If you do, you're going to know it's not going to sound normal. Hopefully you had your bike long enough so you know what your bike should sound like when it's running good and what it sounds like when something's not sounding right. So as far as grease, say you ride your bike only in the seasonal, you're riding it during the summertime, a couple months, so your bike sits in the garage. So most of the time we're not getting exposed to too much dirt and water, so maybe we don't have to maintain it as much as or as often as somebody who's commuting to work, you know, say 3 times a week, maybe going for a ride on the weekend, and then they maybe even going riding their bike through water as far as like when it's raining. If they're doing stuff like that and they're riding their bike pretty frequently all year round, then maybe we're going to need to do maintenance on that a little quicker than we would somebody who's not riding it so much. So it all depends on hours and conditions that you're riding in. That determines when and how often you should service your bike, whether it's greasing your stem or changing tires, brake pads, changing the chain, things like that. So this bike has been sitting out in the elements. It's been getting a lot of sun. You can tell by the paint's pretty faded down, the stickers are faded, and it's also been exposed to rain. It hasn't been covered. At the very minimal, if you could get a cover for your bike, at least like a shade cover, so it's not getting direct sunlight, and maybe the rain is staying away from it as well. It's going to last a lot longer. Tires will stay in better condition, but once you get direct sunlight and we start to get water on it, as like rain, then parts are going to break down a lot quicker. Even if you have a brand new set of tires you picked up last summer, if the bike's been sitting outside a whole year later, the sidewall is going to be all cracked, even though you have lots of tread left. So that can be suspect, and you might want to change. So let's say water does get inside here. We're going to take a look and see what's going on in there. Like I said, it's not rubber tight or tight seal. It's a little bit of water is always going to run in there. Showing you some variation. The first bike we looked at, that was a quill stem. usually has a 1-inch steer tube, and it's a threaded headset where there's bolts that kind of keep all the headset together. This one's a threadless, so there's no threads involved. People always ask, what do I do? Do I loosen the top cap first, or do I loosen the stem bolts first? Doesn't matter. You can go either way. Just when you're all ready to do that last bolt, make sure that you're hanging on to your fork, or at least secure it to your frame so it's not going to drop down. So right now I loosened my 2 stem bolts, and this here uses a compression plug style for the steer tube. So now I'm going to hang on to it because that's the last part. A lot of times there's a little bit of friction on there, so it's not going to just slip off, but sometimes it does. If you took everything off, walked away, it might hit the floor. So this guy's going to come off, and a lot of times you can let this guy hang a little bit if it's not putting too much pressure on your cables and housings. We don't want to tweak or bend anything too bad. So right off the bat, we got our steer tube. So fork comes up, then we go steer tube. This particular one is carbon, and then we have some spacers. I got 1, 2, 3 spacers that I added there. And just make sure you put everything in order when you take this apart. Now we have a little top cover cap. This one has a little rubber O-ring on the inside. That's actually supposed to help maybe minimize water leakage or dust to go inside, because right below it is your bearing. So we want to keep dust away from the bearing as long as possible. So this guy I need to separate from the frame. So what we can do is drop the fork down a little bit and then shoot it up, and now it just freed this guy. So we're going to slide that up, and this followed right here. This is another wedge system that takes away a lot of play, so the steer tube isn't bouncing around. So we're taking these 2 guys off. Make sure you keep the order. So I could already see that the grease is pretty brown or gray, telling me it's dirty. Originally the grease is either the color that you pull out of the can. I used Park Tool, which is kind of a greenish, bluish, and then many different colors from there. So go ahead and drop this down. So my brake is still hooked up, so it's not going to be completely free from the bike. So when in doubt, when you have too many pieces hanging from your bike, you could always secure your fork or handlebars to the frame, minimize any stress on your housings. But these are pretty stiff. I'm gonna let that hang. I think we'll be okay for now. So we're gonna take a look inside. So right inside here, this is the outer edge of our head tube right here. And then on the inside, we have our sealed cartridge bearing. Our bearing's right inside there. So it does have a little bit of fresh grease, a little bit of green I can see, but a little bit of brown as well. So some dirt has made its way in there. So it's not completely sealed off from grime. And this guy should pull up. Might have to use 2 fingers. Like that, and then we can see the base here. So this may have been cleaned not too long ago. We still got a little bit of color green in there, so that's telling me the grease is not too bad as far as contaminated, looking pretty good. Sometimes this area will, say like after a season of riding some cyclocross races or something like that, you're going through a little mud, a little rain, dust and grit will get inside here. When you're pulling this out, you're going to hear a lot of crunchy grittiness. That's a sign that we do have contamination in there, so we just got to wipe everything down, give a check for your bearings, give it a spin, making sure that it still spins pretty good. There's no grittiness or chunkiness or tight spots. I'm gonna wipe everything down, reapply some fresh grease in there. So here's that little wedge piece. It has a split washer to expand as needed. Flipping this guy over, definitely seeing some dirtiness there. Just turning color, pretty normal though, pretty normal stuff. I'm not too worried about it. I don't feel any grittiness in that grease. So that's our top bearing. That's our bottom of the bearing. So here's a look through our head tube. This is the top of the head tube. This is where our stem would usually sit. And we're just looking down on the inside, and you can see all the way through. Inside, that's the inside of the frame. Pretty hollow. There's a lot of material in there. It doesn't get touched or filled because it's just that skinny steer tube from the fork. All right, so here we're going to take a look at the bottom of the head tube. Here's the bottom of the head tube here. Here's our down tube. Going to take a closer look. So here you can see this is the outer edge of the head tube. Definitely got some dirt here. And this is the insert for the head tube, and then we have our bearing on the inside. So quite a bit of dust and dirt and grime has gotten here. You could say that's contamination. So this is the bottom, so this area is more susceptible to having dirt and dust kicked up to it. So we're gonna go ahead and get this bearing out. You can definitely hear some crunching and grittiness right there. And yeah, showing a lot of dirt and dust right there. Inside, not too bad though, looking pretty clean here on the base where the bearing's making contact. But a pretty good sign. We're gonna wipe this down and clean it back up again. This is probably You know, this could be possibly 5 to 10 rides in, so not terrible. Hasn't been put through the worst of conditions either in that time frame. So just by wiping parts down, get a clean cloth, wiping all the excess off. For sealed cartridge bearings, as long as we're still running good, put a finger in there, give it a spin. It should spin pretty good. You're gonna feel a little bit of toughness. That's probably just the grease, which is okay. You just don't want it to feel real gritty and chunky and have tight spots. If you do, then you might as well go ahead and replace this guy. Sometimes you can open these up and clean them up and then re-grease them and then put them back together. It just depends what your budget is and the condition. But usually it's not recommended. You're just replacing the whole bearing. So just a nice wipe down, and then we'll wipe down the inside of that head tube, and then we'll reapply some new grease. Bottom line, if rain does get in your system, you leave it on the car, of course it's going to get wet. You leave it outside, locked up somewhere, it's going to get wet. You go for a ride in the rain, yeah, it's going to get wet. Things are going to seep in, just like water gets in your shoes when your socks get wet, things like that. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to hurt anything really, as long as you're doing regular maintenance. But if you just kind of use and abuse and you do this year after year after year, yeah, that's when parts start to get beat up and compromised and then start to rust, and maybe parts don't want to come apart anymore. That's where you're going to do some damage. But if you go in regularly, like I said, all depends how much you're riding, what conditions you're riding in. That can vary per person. Just kind of keep count of hours, and then maybe after 60 hours or 120 hours or something like that, go ahead and take it apart, take a look, see where you're at. That's how you're going to figure out what kind of maintenance schedule is required for your type of riding. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and if you have any comments about anything as far as bike related, I'll be happy to make a little video for you, or just even comment. I can answer some questions online. All right, thanks a lot.